Hi, I'm Sydney, and today I'm going to be talking about Late Night with the Devil. I saw this film this past Sunday, and I went into it having seen the trailer twice, but other than that, I really didn't want to know anything else about it, and I'm very glad that I did that. It was a pretty pure experience to just go in and watch it without researching or whatever, just going in straight. David Dastmalchian stars as a 1977 late night host who is struggling in his personal life, but is striving to make history basically with a Halloween special. Instead of giving you a whole recap of the movie, I'm just going to assume you've seen it, so be prepared, this will have spoilers in it. First off, the style of this film is very distinct, and overall the whole feeling of this film is very unique. I haven't seen anything like this in quite a while. The movie in that way is very refreshing. And if you can't tell already, I did like it, just from my tone. I liked the movie. I'll just start by saying that. The movie starts with it reminds me of the E! True Hollywood Story, sort of. It gives a summary of the main character played by David Dastmalchian, who Jack Delroy gives a little summary of his life leading up to this point of this Halloween special. And it's very cutaway. It's very stylistically distinct and edgy with the narration on top of it. And then we dive into watching the Halloween special. From there, stylistically, it does break consistency, and that at first, when presented with the film at the beginning after the introduction, it feels like, oh wow, we're purely, truly just going to be watching this sort of found footage of the Halloween special that was filmed that night in 1977. But as you're watching the movie, in the commercial breaks, it cuts away and we're seeing what's happening behind the scenes, but not through the eyes of the cameras that are on set. We kind of break out of that, and they present that well because the aspect ratio changes quite a bit throughout the film. We go from that, I don't know what the dimensions are, but we go from that square shape, which is us watching the 70s live broadcast, and then we go into that widescreen shape, which kind of takes us out of it, and we're in black and white, and now we're in the set and we're seeing what's happening behind the scenes. In that way, it's not totally consistent, but to be honest, it really didn't bother me. I know some other people, it's been kind of like, well, this isn't really found footage as far as genre, and it makes it less believable because you're not, and I'm like, that's kind of stuff doesn't bother me. I think it was very necessary for the storytelling aspect of this film to really show us what's going on behind the scenes, because Jack Delroy's persona in front of the camera is very different from what it is off of the camera, and it's important for us as the audience to see that. So I thought it was cool. I didn't mind it. When I was watching the film, there were a few times where I personally thought the pacing was slow. But after having sat with the film for a little bit, and even while I was watching it, I was recognizing what was happening, because and I'm talking about the scenes where we're watching the late night show. And if you go back and actually watch a lot of these 1970s shows, like in the past in my life, I've put on like Johnny Carson or something like that. And there are these iconic, highlighted, funny guests or moments from the show over the decades. But if you really just sit and watch an episode, it's kind of, a lot of it doesn't hold up, whether it be the monologues because of we're not in that time anymore, or the guests or the style of humor isn't really the same. Sometimes they're really boring, even though they are these iconic shows and they deserve that title, but they are what they are when watching them with today's lens, you know what I mean? And there were times when I was watching Late Night with the Devil, and they were in the beginning, whether it be his monologue and leading into the next guest and his banter with the sidekick and blah, 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 where I was just kind of like, okay. And there's moments where like he's telling jokes and the audience is laughing, but I'm sitting there and I'm like, I'm not laughing. There were actually a few moments of kind of like humor in this, but my point being, I don't criticize the film for feeling that way, because I actually do think it's true to what watching a late night show from the 1970s would actually feel like watching it today, if that makes sense. In general, the tone of the film is pretty lighthearted. I don't know that that's quite the correct word, but because Jack Delroy's character, we have all this preface with the beginning intro that he's gone through a lot of really hard times with his wife passing away. Right away, we're kind of given that he's basically in a cult. They're like, oh, it has mysterious rumors, and we're like, okay, it's a cult. But so we understand right away that these things are going to come to fruition, or things are gonna come together full circle from that introduction. But then after that, it really breaks into like, oh, giddy, joking, show business sort of tone. They maintain that until the very end, even when stuff starts to go haywire in the middle. So now jumping into spoilers, when Christu has his episode and he's like vomiting all the black, I can't remember what it's called, but you know, all that stuff, and it's very shocking, and then they cut back, and then the next guest comes on, and then whatever, they kind of just like, moving on, the show must go on. They kind of try to just break the tone to keep the viewers emotionally balanced. Because of that, I think the tension building in the film isn't a consistent upslope to the third act where everything goes crazy. It kind of does this a little bit, but again, where I think that could be a criticism, I actually view it as them really committing to the actualization of what would happen in this scenario. So I appreciate it, because when things go wrong in TV, people don't like freak out and have a meltdown. I think in the same way, but just heightened, 1970s version of that is like, keep moving along, not letting this affect me. Ha ha ha, I'm the host kind of thing. I don't know. I'm rambling. And on another sort of layered sense, Jack Delroy's character is aware that his wife possibly presenting herself to him through Christu, and Christu's sort of breakdown. He knows that those are going to increase ratings and viewership. So he's also wanting the show to go on for that purpose, of course. So my point being that although the tension building and tone is not consistent, I think it's still effective in building the reality of the space. And I'll dive a little bit more into the ending in a moment, but first reaction of the ending, it's very striking and effective to watch. But I will say it also, that last scene of Jack Delroy just with the knife in Lily is very like, I literally kind of did that in the theater. I was like, oh shoot. And then the movie just ends. Classic movie making, where they get you and then you're like, oh my God, it's over. Because they had introed the film with such I'm blanking on the word right now, but you know, they really kind of like read it to you. Here's what's going on. That I thought maybe at the ending they would have come back to that and said like, Jack Delroy served this many years in prison, or the show ended that night and never aired again, or some sort of closure there. In the way that, weird comparison, but if you've ever seen Dickie Roberts' former child star, it's very much the same format. They open with the E! True Hollywood Story, and then they close it with the E! True Hollywood Story, and it's like a finished story, you know? But they didn't do that with this movie. They just give you that last moment, and then the movie's over. So in that way, it left me wanting to know more just information within this world that they've built of, okay, well, what happened to him? And like, I apparently, I think this is the first time we've seen, like, the world has seen this footage from this show since then. So like, why was it kept under wraps? Was there any sort of trial? Like, within this world, I just would love to know more information, which is good on them storytelling wise to get that from the viewer. So within watching the movie, here are some things that stood out to me right away as far as real world influences, because like I mentioned before, I really do, as sort of fantastical and stylistic and unrealistic the like third act and stuff can be, or you know, seem, I felt like they were strangely very grounded in reality at the same time. For me, right away, I was kind of like I mentioned earlier, I was feeling those late night 70s influences play in. The set design was beautiful. The cut cards, which like we'll talk about in a minute, and then the fashion, the delivery. I do think, well, and it's funny, and then they're totally referencing Johnny Carson the whole time as being Jack Delroy's competitor. And when I think about Johnny Carson was just much more like laid back and natural and casual about it, at least when I picture him. And Jack Delroy is so much more like, I feel like he's performing a bit more. So there's differences there, obviously. But anyways, you felt the time period that was being pulled from. Right away, I think I just had the advantage of knowing who Uri Geller and the Amazing Randy were, who are mirrors. Well, Christou and Carmichael, the skeptic, are mirrors of them. I don't even remember where. I think it must have been on Netflix. I don't remember if it was just called The Amazing Randy, but I'd seen a documentary a long time ago about the Amazing Randy, who was a magician turned skeptic who would go on these shows like Johnny Carson and purely seek out to disprove these sort of mediums and spiritualists and people who claim to have telekinesis and stuff like that. And he had a really famous rivalry. I won't break down the whole thing with Uri Geller, who claimed he could bend spoons and stuff like that. And then the Amazing Randy would come on and be like, look, I can do it too. This is how he's doing it. And it's a really incredible story, his life story. So if you're interested in that, definitely look it up. But while watching Late Night with the Devil, I was like, I see what they're doing here. Except Carmichael's version of the Amazing Randy is way douchier. So right away, I'm kind of like not, because I think in reality, I'm on the Amazing Randy side where I'm like, oh, these spiritualists are taking advantage of vulnerable people and using tricks and whatever to manipulate people in a way that's not fun, in the way that like magicians do it. Anyways, but within the world of the film, I'm like, oh, Carmichael's just like abrasiveness and attitude makes me just want him to, I'm like, okay, devil, like show him he's wrong kind of thing. The next one that was fairly obvious was the cult that is introduced as the introduction. I don't know, that's phrase weird, but for where Lily came from within that segment in the show was to me very reminiscent of like, I mean, a lot of cults of the 70s, I suppose. We have obviously like the Manson sort of a thing with the girls that were around him. And we also have like the Jonestown murders and the way that the cult was demised by like this standoff and then they ended up unaliving themselves, that kind of thing. So those influences were very obvious. The one that I just didn't know about was the cult that was referenced. Well, I guess there's multiple cults. The one that's more of like the higher up one that Jack Delroy is a part of. Apparently after going into the movie, no research, let's watch this, what's it about, let's see it. After the movie, I was like, okay, I want to know more. And that's when I saw references to something called Bohemian Grove Club or something. So I just learned a little bit about that, but apparently, reading it, I'm like, oh, that is that 100%. Whether or not you believe the, conspiracy aspects behind it is different. But as far as like, oh, it's this club with all these very influential, powerful, political, rich people who come together for 2 weeks like a summer camp, it's the same exact thing. So I think that's really cool that they pulled a lot of things from real life and from those time periods together to just, again, make this sort of fantastical story actually be grounded in reality in a lot of ways. So let's get to the AI. Again, something I did not know about going into the movie. And then after I saw the movie, I watched a review by Possessed by Horror, who I love. And it was the first time I realized or heard that there was conflict. People are very not happy. Not very happy. There are a few title cards that were apparently generated by AI, and then according to the production team, an artist was hired to retouch and edit these photos to make them good to use for the movie. And the big upset is that they're using AI that could have potentially taken someone else's job. And I don't want to dive too much into it, but in the context of this specific film, if they did hire an artist to retouch the AI generated title cards, then did they take someone's job? Would that artist just have created that work anyways, and it just was a tool used to make his job easier? Then I don't see any problem with that, especially because those title cards don't have a huge effect on the plot moving forward with the storytelling, anything like that. It's just like a device used to add to the stylistic time period setting. And I don't know the specific details of like, well, how much, well, if it generated the title card, which is what it's Midnight Owl or something like that, and it has the logo of the owl, and then on the actual set you see the owl. Well, if all that was AI done, then like, I don't know. It's a gray area. It's not black and white, but my personal opinion for this specific movie, I don't think that the whole movie should be boycotted or panned because of these small moments that were potentially also worked on by an artist as well. And it sounds like in this instance, it was used as a tool instead of being used as like a crutch or a replacement for a human completely. You know what I mean? I don't know. It's tough. And as of now, the movie stands at 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. Metacritic, it's 73%. Apparently, people are just without like boycotting the movie because of the AI thing, or just totally slamming it in ratings without even seeing it because of the AI thing. I really don't think that's called for. Like, so many people worked on this film. It's really beautifully made. It's a wonderful film. When you look at all the work that's gone into it by people, that to discredit it or sham it for those little tiny, like they're literally so insignificant, I think is a shame. But I do think it's valid and worthy that that conversation continue, because in this film, I think it's fine, but like other movies may use it in a way where it's not fine. And so like, where is that line and what are those balances? It's hard to say, but that's my thought on that. Some criticisms I do have of the film though aren't too much. I think the only thing that particularly stood out to me was the CGI in the movie. With it being lower budget, I really feel like they should have pulled back a little bit and held more onto the practical effects. The electricity, it happens quite a handful of times where the electricity like beams through the studio, and I see why that they use that effect leading up to the moment Lily's head like splits and all of that. It feels connected, but at the same time, it just, with everything feeling so old, that effect really stood out. And not necessarily in the best way. It didn't totally pull me out of the movie, but it definitely was like, oh, okay. And then as far as storytelling and plot, the only thing that particularly bothered me or took me out of it was when Carmichael hypnotizes the sidekick into thinking that there's worms in his body, and he's doing that by trying to disprove Lily's possession moments earlier. That whole scene was a little bit like, that's unlikely. Like, Carmichael hypnotized everyone in the studio and us at home watching that these worms like burst out of him. It just like, took it a little bit too far for me as far as like extending out of reality. I get why it was used, because then it's like, well, let's look at the footage. See, it never happened. And let's look at Lily's footage now. I see like the beats that are meant to happen to show that Lily's thing was true. But at the same time, it just felt so shocking and intense and graphic, but very unlikely. I'm just watching it. I'm like, wait, what? So none of that was supposed to be real? I don't understand. I don't know. It just wasn't my favorite moment. And then leading up to the actual final moments where it hits the fan, Lily is repossessed by Mr. Wriggles. She kills the sidekick, slits the throat of her guardian psychologist. She kills a bunch of people in the studio, and then takes Jack Delroy on this psychological journey of going through the depths of his mind and memory. And he's just so he's so deep in the like trance that he's being put through. Okay, I gotta pause. I lost my train of thought. I had to plug in my computer, so I don't know where I left off, so I'm just going to keep talking. But at the end, he's with his wife in this obviously manipulated sort of flashback. And upon first and only viewing, I was a bit confused in that moment, to be honest, when he was with his wife, on whether or not it was a pure flashback or whether it was being manipulated. And then second off, I kind of couldn't understand what the wife was saying in a handful of it. I'm one of those people who have subtitles on with everything I watch, and that was one of those moments where I was just like, oh, I'd appreciate a good subtitle here, because she's supposed to be sick and she's labored, and so some of the words just came out kind of mushy to me, where I was like, wait, what is she saying? What is she saying? But she asks him to end her suffering. He takes the sacrificial dagger and kills her. Cuts, he actually killed Lily. So what is the meaning behind all of that? Why did that happen? Well, it's a good question. There was so many thoughts for me at the end there, because I was like, well, why would the demon want Jack to kill Lily if Lily was his way of coming out and like being in the real world? Does he really even need Lily? Or was it just kind of fun for him to use her as a body? It was just all, I guess, a big joke on Jack. Maybe to have him kill Lily and not know he was doing that, to just like trick him. But then the question was, well, did he actually kill his wife? But if he stabbed her, that would have been like very obvious, you would think. And autopsy or doctors or whatever, like that seems like it would have been news. So I was just unsure. I was like, did he actually stab his wife and that's how she died? But she had presented it as take my suffering away from me. And so he killed her. But then that's where some of the dialogue was missing, where like she seemed to maybe be aware that he had to make a sacrifice. And so she was being that sacrifice for him. And she just kind of used that excuse of like, take me out of my suffering. So did he, the question I still kind of am like, not, I'm pretty convinced, but not 100% convinced on, is like, did he actually kill his wife? Because he truly seemed to love her like so much. But was it like, well, she's already dying, so I'm helping? That was his way of rationalizing it, maybe, when he had to make this sacrifice. And then is Madeline, his wife, mad at him? Because throughout the film, anytime she was presenting herself, she seemed pissed, honestly. When she came through with Christu, she was like making Christu like her and making noise in the studio, and it didn't seem like a pleasant, like, tell Jack I'm here. You know what I mean? It was very like intense. And then same thing later when she is seen on the camera, she looks still sick. And typically if I'm following like movie trends that tend to happen is when someone is crossed over to the other side and they're at peace, then they look like their old good self. And when they're angry and unfinished business, vengeful, whatever, then the ghost looks maybe how they did before they died, or they don't look well. You know what I mean? So the fact that she was presenting herself in that way made me question that sort of flashback scene, because I'm like, she seems not happy. Is she mad at Jack because he killed her and sacrificed her? But then that flashback showed her being like, just do it kind of thing. So yeah, I don't know, there's question marks there for me. One theory that I did read online was that basically the demon did sort of trick him, I suppose, and that he had to make these sacrifices in order to break through in his career, right? That's sort of the implied thing. We have possibly, here's the theory that I read, he sacrificed his wife, so he did kill her in order to get back on TV because he had taken a break when Madeline got sick, I guess. And, you know, I only saw the movie once, so if I'm messing up facts, I'm trying not to. But he sacrificed her, and that was his way to get back on the air. And then he had to make another sacrifice, possibly, to get to that #1 rating. And the joke is, and so I think maybe Jack thought the sacrifice was just going to be maybe Lily, or after Christu had died, maybe he thought that was the sacrifice. He was like, okay, but at the end, everyone ends up dying. It's like that classic monkey's paw, like Tales from the Crypt sort of episode of like, you don't know what wish you're making sort of thing. When he promised to sacrifice, it was like everybody. And it's like, oh, you want to be in the #1 spot? At one point, Lily even says to him, oh, you're going to be very famous soon. I know it. Like, because she's like, I'm going to F everything up. I can't remember. I don't want to look it up right now either, but he does say some line at the very end in the realm of, I didn't think things would happen this way, or something to that effect. And it sort of almost implies like he knew like someone was going to die or a sacrifice was going to have to be made, but he just didn't think it was going to be that bad or something like that. So that's another way to sort of interpret the ending and that arc as far as his involvement. But I think there's no doubt he made a deal when he was in that forest with that demon to increase his fame and stuff like that. It's very interesting though. This is a movie where I know that I liked a movie, or it was at least effective, if for the days after it, I'm still thinking about the movie and thinking about little details and asking questions about it and over-analyzing it. Then I'm like, okay, it did a good job. Overall, I really enjoyed this movie. Like I said earlier, it was refreshing, it felt different. It was great to see David Dastmalchian in a leading role. I just think he's fantastic. He's always a part of projects that are incredible, and he is like one of those reasons they are great is because of his character performance. This was something very different than I'd seen him in before. The way he had to be so joyfully charismatic. I got to see him once. I went to a screening of The Invisible Man, the original one, and he did a live sort of introduction to the film. And he's just someone that you can tell genuinely loves what he does and loves film and loves horror and just is sort of like a geek about it in the best way possible. And when someone has that attitude in real life, not only on screen are they awesome, but off screen they have this genuine passion. It just makes you all the more want to see them in more films and root for them. And he just seems like an awesome guy. So like, I'm really happy for him for this film. I think that's all I have to say about that. For you subscribers who watch all my videos and you're consistent and you're like, where the heck have you been? I got married this past month, so I've been super busy and I also started a horror cabin, which is up and live. I'll put the link down below. It's on Airbnb if you're interested in staying in an immersive sort of haunted, spooky cabin. Check it out. I'm very proud of it. So on top of starting that, planning wedding, getting married, all of that, it's just been super busy. So hoping to starting to pick up the pace again with making videos. But right after getting married, not literally right after, but you know what I mean. We saw, me and my husband went to go see, went to go see Late Night with the Devil, which was just so fun. And I was like, I have to make a video talking about it because it's just been stuck in my brain. So anyways, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye.